Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg, Hopi Chronicles, and we are here for the joyous Blue Wave 2025 election recap with the proud, plucky, successful patriots of the Hopium community, the paid subscribers that make this place go every day. Thank you all for your making Hopium the fuel that makes Hopium go every day, but also thank you for all of you who are watching tonight or in a recording of this at some point when you see it. Just thank you for the work that you've done to bring about what was our best election in the last since 2020. I mean, this is a deeply consequential election in many ways. We're going to talk about it, but it was our best performance as a party since 2020. And we celebrate and we take and celebrate the wins here when they come. That's sort of one of our sort of things that we do here at Hopium. And this was a big one. And I want to remind everybody there are no raised hands here, so don't bother doing a raised hand. We only take questions in the Q&A box. And so this was a big win. And it was a wave. I mean, in many ways, this kind of iteration of my career that began with my work almost 3.5 years ago, challenging this idea that a red wave was going to come in the 2022 election, which sort of, hope my work at my old organization, NDN, NDN was like a private think tank for the Democratic Party. We did policy work and strategic, demographic work and looking at how media was changing. We produced public reports, but a lot of what we did was private. And so I didn't have a huge media profile and I didn't need it for the work that I did. And even though I was on Fox News as a regular guest for 17 years and had thousands of appearances on Fox, I didn't need to be in the media all the time to do my work. And that changed in the spring and summer of 2022 when I started challenging this idea that a red wave was coming based on the data we were seeing. And that journey that I rolled into Hopium in March of 2023 is I've been on this for about 3.5 years of being a commentator, interpreting polls, helping us understand where we are. Not that I didn't do that before, but I had a much, I ran a think tank, right? And so we had lots of other things we did in addition to this kind of day-to-day political analysis. But the reason I raise this is that, during this entire time, we've been sort of on the defense and with our backs against the wall and not on offense, and struggling. And I just want to say that this win was necessary, important, vital for our democracy, for the American people, for the global democracy movement. It showed that Donald Trump was not invulnerable. This was a huge blow to him, this election. This was a huge blow to him personally. He's a wounded creature. And as I have been saying here for many months, is that I believe that one of the central stories of 2025 is that Donald Trump's powers of persuasion and his powers in general are ebbing. He is in political decline. He's in clear physical decline, cognitive decline. And part of what are the story of this election and this period that we were in was that he was starting to go into precipitous decline as a leader, and that was creating a new political moment and an opportunity for us as we seized last night in this extraordinary blue wave election. And what I was saying is that I'm always hesitant to use the term wave because I sort of part of what I did is I challenged the concept of a wave in 2022 when everyone claimed the red wave was going to come, and the red wave never came in 2022. And so I don't jump to use the term. But what happened in 2025 in the United States was there was a blue wave, and it was all over. We not only won the big marquee races that everybody's aware of, in New Jersey and Virginia and in New York and in California, but we also blew, by huge margins, by the way, right? But we also won, a blowout race in Maine on this ballot initiative. We blew it out in Pennsylvania, in the Supreme Court race, retention races. We blew it out in Georgia, statewide Public Service Commission races. And we won a huge vote in Colorado. We also, though, what was so amazing was reading the reports last night from in this community and just friends of mine and people I follow on social media of how, we routed Republicans in places in Texas and in Pennsylvania and in Ohio, and that in all these local elections, these school board races, these mayoral races, these county council races, these city council races that played out all over the country. There were an enormous number of elections all across the US last night that we outperformed expectations in across the country. So there was a wave, and the wave was, people are pissed. This was a clear repudiation of Donald Trump and his rancid regime and his terrible agenda, all the harms that he's doing. What we talk about all the time here is that Donald Trump is doing material harm to the country, and that his approval rating had plummeted. People were angry at him for what he was doing. And what's important is that as unpopular as he is, his agenda is actually much more unpopular than he is. And the problem now for the Republicans is that their candidates have to run on his agenda, which is even more unpopular than he is. And what happened last night is a whole bunch of Republicans all around the country tried to run on his agenda and they failed. This was a huge, incredible failure by the Republican Party last night because our margins were enormous. I mean, for Mikey Sherrill to win by 13 points and Abigail Spanberger to win by 16 points, and for Mondami to break 50 against Cuomo in a three-way race where Trump endorsed. For Gavin Newsom and the California Democrats, congratulations, all the Californians on here, to blow it out by over 20 points in California. The margins were unbelievable. These weren't close elections. And I will tell you, the Republicans in their head believed that New Jersey was going to be close. And so they had put fake polling forward. They had all this garbage polling that is a huge plague in our political system. I was fighting it in our daily commentary here. Many of you were coming to me freaking out about the latest poll, and I would say, no, 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 everything is going to be fine. She's doing well, right? When you look at the real polls and not the fake polls. But I think Republicans really thought they were going to win New Jersey last night, and I think New Jersey was a real blow to them. So this was a painful loss. There's no putting lipstick on this pig for them. They're a deep. Their leader is unpopular. His powers are ebbing. He is the oldest man ever elected to the presidency, and he's in clear physical decline. And he continues to say unbelievably batshit crazy things every day that, for many other people, would have them carted off and brought and not allowed to be in a place of authority around other people, let alone the most important position in the world. And I think just in some ways we've talked about here that our job at Hopium was to pull the curtain back from the wizard to remind people the emperor had no clothes. And I think that happened last night. I think that in some ways the absurdity of his presidency, the harms that he's doing, just the outrageousness of his abandonment of the constitutional order and his even though he was elected to be a president, he doesn't want that job, right? He wants to be a dictator and a tyrant and a king and to have a palace instead of a house, right? And all these things. And I think that part of what happened in the last few weeks, and I've been doing a lot of commentary on this in the last today, talking to people last few days, is I think that, part of what happened in 2024 is I don't think the polls were wrong in 2024. I think the election changed in the last week. There is a lot of evidence that Trump, the late breaking voters broke to Trump. And so the polls a week out that had Harris up by a point or 2 points and us doing very competitive in the battleground states, I think were accurate. I think what happened is, based on exit polls and other discussions, things broke open to him at the end. I think something similar happened in this election. I think that, there was always this possibility that we could have a good election, and the polling was always very positive for us. But I think a combination of things in the last week to 10 days kind of created this toxic stew for them. It was the combination of the government shutdown and Democrats fighting more effectively and kind of lifting ourselves off the mat, which I think brought Democrats back into the game, challenging Trump and staying strong. but also it was his reaction to the shutdown, where he validated all of our arguments that he was acting imperially and illiberally and doing harm to the American people. Because then what he started doing is he started doing harm to the American people, and as a reaction to us being unwilling to cut a deal. And he started acting even more illiberally, right? Illegally spending money, cutting SNAP benefits, and all the things that he did. And so I think his performance in the last few weeks kind of reinforced the central arguments that we were making about him. I think that the November 1st, the open enrollment kicking in, where people became aware of the healthcare price increases they were going to facing, and the trauma this was going to bring to many families. The SNAP benefits getting cut, which got huge play in the states at a national level, because every governor and every state legislature actually had to start dealing with what it meant that people were going to start going hungry in their states, and this got enormous amplification. I also think that his tearing down of the East Wing and the building of the Gilded Ballroom broke through. It broke through to people. This all the arguments we've been making about his, desire to be a dictator. I there is a lot of data showing that people are very upset about this. That the question of threats to democracy has risen very dramatically as a salient issue in our polling. But I was listening to MSNBC. I watched a lot of TV yesterday. I don't watch a lot of TV news. It was incredible how many man on the street interviews they were doing for people waiting online to vote who brought up the ballroom and brought up the East Wing, the demolition of the East Wing, brought it up on their own. It just came out of their mouths as something that kind of freaked them out. And so I think all of this stuff combined, our fighting more effectively, I think woke up our side. I think Obama's rallies kind of also was another signal for people to get back in the game, and he was so effective in these great rallies, and they were put on. The visuals were amazing. We had a lot of same day in the places where there was same day registration. We had same day surge yesterday in Virginia and New York. And I think this all kind of became a toxic stew, and it all pushed our performance to beyond the upper end of what was possible. I mean, for us to win California by 20 plus points, and Pennsylvania by the Supreme Court retention by 20 plus points, and the Maine ballot initiative by 20 plus points, and Spamberger by 16, and Cheryl by 13. I mean, I was watching television last night, like all of you, right? I was watching the reports come in. And I will tell you, I was stunned at what was happening in rural counties in both Virginia and New Jersey. I mean, it was clear this was going to be a blowout. And that's what I mean. This was a wave. I mean, there was no, they couldn't, when a wave comes, right, everything goes up together. And what I had been writing to you in the last few weeks, and I will admit to you, I've been repeating a lot of the graphs and charts and data, because I don't know that people really could understand what we were actually seeing in the data. And because something had changed. And what had changed in the last few months was that there started to become structural movement towards us and away from them. And what I mean by that, it wasn't just that Trump was falling, but that the relative strength of the two parties were starting to change. And so, in one of the measures of that, what's called the generic ballot, which is will you vote Democrat, Republican in the election next year? We've gained between 7 and 8 points in the polling averages, and in some of the recent high quality generic ballot, we've actually gained 12 points since a year ago. So there's been a shift where, we are now much stronger than we were. The second measure was Gallup released. They do a quarterly party ID, which is, are you a Democrat or Republican? How do you identify? We've gained 12 points in that in the last year. That's a huge movement, guys. I mean, these are big structural changes in the relative strength of the two parties. I shared data with you that for the first time in Gallup's tracking in 15 years, we're now seen as the party who's more likely to bring about broad prosperity for everybody, which is obviously very central to people's understanding of the two parties. That's also a huge structural change. And so, what I had been sharing with you over the last few weeks is that this was likely to be a good election for us because we were starting to get these secondary measures that it wasn't just Trump was falling and his agenda was unpopular, but that was starting to accrue to the brands of the two parties, and that our brand was improving and their brand was in decline relative to one another. I do think that this recent development of Schumer and Jeffries successfully leading the Democrats into battle on the shutdown and the fight over the ACA also made Democrats more energized. And the other data that I showed you prior to the election was this, I think, really important data from CNN that showed that even though Republicans were happier with their party than Democrats were, Democrats had much greater intensity to vote in the election. And that vote and that intensity was being driven to a great degree by threats to democracy, by the no king sentiment in our family, right? And that we have to keep that in mind because I don't know that Democrats broadly still really understand the centrality. I mean, I think we've nailed affordability and healthcare. Like those are two legs of the stool, but I think there's a third leg of the stool, and I think it's the issues around his abandonment of the constitutional order, his desire to be a king, his corruption, this basket of issues around his abuse of power that, I mean, one of the things that we saw today was that we had the Supreme Court arguments about the tariffs. I have written this and I want to say this again. The tariffs are the greatest abuse of power by an American president in our history with no near peer. I mean, he literally changed America's economic relationship with every single person in the entire world without any consultation with Congress. He literally did modern day taxation without representation by taxing us at the largest tax increase in history without congressional consultation, right? He's crushed farmers and small businesses and made it harder for families to get by without any consultation with Congress. It's all wildly illegal and unconstitutional. It's the greatest abuse of power in American history. And I think that we have to develop that part of our narrative and story, I think, in a far more ambitious way than we have. And I'm going to be doing a lot of analysis about that in the coming weeks and make that case. Those of you who follow Hopium closely know I've been making this case, but I think it's been, last night was a repudiation of Donald Trump, period, right? And his politics. And that includes, I think, when I showed you 2 weeks ago, the polling in the Economist YouGov on his demolition of the East Wing, it had 25% approval rating, right? That's the single most unpopular thing that he's done in as president. Nothing else is at 25%. And so I think that what we have to take away here is that we head now into what is a deeply consequential period of budget negotiations. Some point the House is going to come back. And we have to fight as hard as we can to achieve, and get as much as we can in these negotiations to mitigate the harm that they're doing. And as I've talked about here, I think the Republicans have two really bad options in front of them, and only two. The first one is that they embrace Trump's unpopular agenda and they decide to run on the tariffs and increasing prices and slowing the economy and gutting healthcare for Americans, unraveling the vaccine regimes, raising your electricity prices through the clean energy subsidy cuts, exploding the deficit, throwing people into gulags and sacrificing our cherished liberties and freedoms and, getting rid of due process and all these things, building a gilded ballroom in the White House and all these things. They're going to have to run on all that and defend what I call the indefensible. That's one option. The other option they have is they start to force Trump to course correct and to mitigate the harm that he's doing to the American people and to them and to their political project. Because they just tried to run on this agenda and they failed miserably. They got blown out in this election. And they all know this. And these people who have to run next year, and remember, Republicans have to run all across the country next year. Senate, House, governor, attorney general, right? Like there are tens of thousands of Republicans that have to go run with this guy and his awful, historically unpopular agenda that's doing material harm to the American people. They have to defend all this because we're going to make all this central to the discourse. And we already have, and we've been very successful. He's losing all the arguments around the shutdown. They're losing the arguments on healthcare, right? So we've made this, Schumer and Jeffries have successfully changed, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for this election success that we just had because we just made the discourse in the country about the harms he's doing to the country. And it evoked all of this and made this more clear to people. Well, now we have to have that conversation for the next 12 months. And the thing is, the harms could actually get much worse. The economy could get much worse. We're going to have far more graphic stories about what's happening with people who are losing access to health care. Electricity prices are going to continue to go up, right? Inflation could get far worse. The weakening of our fiscal condition could start to really bite on us in ways that it isn't today. And so I could go down a long list of things that may get worse. So the second option they have, as I said, is they can course correct and they can force Trump to change and to admit that he made a mistake and that he's the biggest fuck up in American history. And he's done incredible harm to our country, to all of us, and to our democracy, to our standing in the world, to our future prospects, right? They can start to force him to deal with what he's done and his madness and his extremism and this and the world's, the worst agenda in American history. And that process has already begun because in late July, they voted to release the Epstein files in the House. Massive rebellion, huge fuck you to the president, and they released the Epstein files. We've seen 13 Republicans in the House write a letter to the speaker, the cowardly speaker, as I call him, demanding that they start negotiating the ACA subsidy cuts because they're going to do too much harm to people in their community, in their back home. We saw last week the single biggest rebuke of Trump up until the election, which was the Senate, the Republican Senate voted 3 times to repeal various aspects of Trump's terrible tariffs. 3 times. A massive rebuke on the central domestic plank of his by his own Senate. And Democrats and Republicans. I had that interview with Tim Kaine. We walked us through everything that happened. And today, the Supreme Court seemed very skeptical of the legality of these tariffs. They're clearly illegal. And I've said this before that not only are they the greatest abuse of power in American history, of all the powers the founders would have given to an American president, the one that they never would have given would have been unilateral tariff authority, given that unilateral tariffs by Mad King George was a central reason the revolution happened. And so there's no possibility that they would have ever given him these powers. And his assertion that he has these powers is one of the greatest abuses, injuries, and usurpations, right? To use those terms that we use in our letter to America and our resolutions project, that one could imagine, right? And so so they're in a deep hole, right? They have a aging and failed and addled leader who's driven their party off a cliff and caused them to do things that are doing unbelievable harm to America. They don't really have any easy way to turn all that off and to fix all of that. They can't even bring the House back for regular order when the budget is now, what are we now? We're over 5 weeks late on the budget. The budget was required by law to be finished by September 30th. And the reason the government shut down is because the Republicans didn't pass a budget to fund the government. The level of chaos is incredible, and they have narrow majorities. Trump has been governing as if he had massive majorities. They can only lose 2 votes in the House and 3 votes in the Senate. And I think that part of the reason Mike Johnson has kept the House out is that he has lost ideological control over the House. He's already lost 2 members. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Representative Massey are gone for them, which means that any other vote that comes up, if one person splits, they no longer can do anything in the House. And the question is, if they get one discharge petition through when they come back, there could be more. And then all of a sudden, Mike Johnson is a eunuch and not a speaker. And so I think that the media has sort of put lipstick on the pig here. I think that this is a far more perilous place that they're in, and now they know this isn't working. They, I think, had the soft comfort of these fake Republican polls claiming everything that was fine. They learned last night things aren't fine. They also learned that Donald Trump doesn't give a shit about any of them. He didn't campaign for the Republican candidates. He didn't spend any money. He was off the campaign trail for the last few weeks. He let these guys crash and burn. He wasn't a leader of the party. He betrayed his own candidates. He actually mocked the Virginia, their candidate in Virginia tonight in an interview on Fox News. And these candidates who are up in 2026 just saw Donald Trump demonstrate a complete lack of concern about electing Republican candidates, including Jack Ciattarelli, by the way, who almost won in 2021, right? And he didn't campaign for Ciattarelli. They didn't spend any money. Donald Trump has $500 million sitting in a campaign account. He didn't spend a penny. And so that to me also was a huge error in keeping his team together because they now feel that they're on their own and they got to go sell this piece of shit agenda to their voters that they know they can't sell. And so what it means that because what I was explaining that because party ID and I'll conclude with this is that because party ID and the generic ballot have shifted between 7 and 12 points, and we've seen that show up last night. We also have seen it in the polling in the Senate races in Alaska, states that are plus 10 Trump states in 2024. We have competitive Senate races now. If Mary Patola gets into Alaska, we have a competitive governor's race in Iowa. We have a competitive governor's race and Senate race in Ohio. We have competitive Senate races in a competitive Senate race in Texas, which we have a competitive race in Florida. Last night, among all the various wins that we had, our candidate for mayor of Miami, which hasn't elected a Democrat since the 1990s, got the most votes and is going to a December runoff. It's a race we're going to be looking at about potentially getting involved in, right? If we think there's a path for victory there. That was a huge, blow for the Republicans last night. And so what's happened, what it means is that the battlefield has shifted 7, 8, 9, 10 points since a year ago. So it means these Republicans who thought they were safe, right, who are in a plus 10 Republican district, all of a sudden they're going to have competitive races potentially. And so the battlefield has shifted. We're now on offense. We're playing on their side of the field. And one of the things that Tom Bonnier talked about today in a great interview I did with him is that it also means that we saw our young people and Hispanic voters come back to us. Mikey Sherrill got 68% of the Hispanic vote in New Jersey last night. Incredible performance. We saw also very strong performance with Hispanics in Virginia. Is that, if we can start replicating that coalition that we used to have that unraveled for us in 2024, it means also that their assumptions about redistricting in Texas, for example, we could have a lot more competitive races there than they expected. We could be, I think the California races that, people think are competitive could start becoming uncompetitive, the ones that are left that haven't been put into the safe Democratic camp. Because if the Hispanic vote is returning back to its normal place of plus 30, plus 35 for Democrats, then all of a sudden a bunch of these House districts that they thought were going to be, safe or leaning their way are no longer safe or leaning their way. And that they made huge assumptions when they began this effort to go steal, to change this mid-decade redistricting. They made assumptions about the electorate that are now no longer true. So I think the way that I just want to conclude right now is that, we had an incredible night. You guys have worked your ass off. Many of the people in this community wrote postcards and have been canvassing and been infowaring and donated money and texted and made phone calls. You guys have been busting your ass now for months and months and months, and it paid off. And I hope all of you, however you sort of savor the victory and give yourself credit and pat yourself on the back and sort of, honor the work that you've done. You need to do that. I'm honoring it now by saying thank you from the bottom of my heart as a fellow patriot for all that you've done. The power of this community remains unbelievable, and I'm so grateful for all of you. But I think now we need to be on offense. Trump is wounded. He is deeply unpopular. His agenda is a disaster. His party has a narrow majority and is deeply factious. They're seeing cracks, emerge. And getting this budget done in the next few months, I think we have to go and be as aggressive as we possibly can. Can we roll back the tariffs? Can we restore the ACA and Medicaid cuts? Can we restore the clean energy subsidies that will lower electricity prices and put us back on a path to, win the battle over climate change. Can we roll back the funding of ICE and the beefing up of ICE? We have big objectives here, and in Hopium, our list of things to do, we have our races and our campaigns, but we also have these things that we're fighting for, our four-part agenda. And I think in the next coming months, we have to help our leaders understand that we expect them now to be on offense, and that in these budget negotiations, we shouldn't be settling just for the ACA subsidy cuts, in my view. We need to be asking for much, much more. The tariffs are hurting people and they should go away. The ACA, the cuts to healthcare are hurting people. They should be restored. The way that Trump is using ICE and DHS is violating our civil liberties and our freedoms, and it should stop. And the cuts to the clean energy subsidies has raised electricity prices. We should get rid of them. Donald Trump has made mistake after mistake. The tariffs were a mistake. The cuts to the ACA and the Medicaid are a mistake. The cuts to clean energy subsidies are a mistake. The beefing up and his use of ICE as a domestic political terror force is a mistake. He was a mistake. Electing him was a mistake. And we have to now right these mistakes. And we need to have confidence. And as I wrote last night or in the last 24 hours, to me, the most important thing that is happening right now is not just his decline and his failure, but it's that we're beginning to step into our own power and understand how to use our power more effectively. I want to conclude by saying that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries deserve a lot of credit for what happened last night. I think if we had not gone to bat and fought over the budget and healthcare, I don't know that we would have had the election that we had last night. I'm not convinced that we did, because what happened was that we have been throwing the harms that Trump was doing in front of voters every day since the shutdown began. And I think this was a successful strategy. It's what all of you wanted. You wanted Schumer and Jeffries to fight, and they did. And they've held the line, and it paid off hugely for us last night. And so, congratulations, everybody. Let me get to questions.